I do like to break out competency models into leadership level, right? And it's not that leaders need different skills per se. It's just senior leaders need more of a strategic, high level focus, whereas the frontline leader needs something a little bit more interpersonal. And also, they're newer to the role, they need new skills. So I really do like to talk to the people in the organization and be like, what do you wish you would have known? What would have made your life 100 times easier in that first 6 months? And usually you get a lot of similar responses. When you present it to somebody and their eyes glaze over because they're overwhelmed, that's too much, right? Just pull back, give up, start over.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Launchpad, where we help technical managers improve themselves, their teams, and their organizations. On this show, I talk with industry leaders, coaches, authors, and experts to help give you actionable insights to improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Our guest today is Joel Taylor. Joel and I met several months ago when speaking to his local Association for Talent Development chapter. He organized the presentation and even sent me a great gift afterwards. Recently, Joel has been working on the task of developing leadership competencies for new managers and making sure those competencies are tied to the company's culture and values. Having been a part of exercises like this in the past, I can appreciate just how big of a task this is. In this episode, you can expect to learn when you, as a new manager, should think about saying no, why it is okay to not have all the answers, how to use the 6-box model to improve team performance, why leadership competencies must be defined through company culture, and so much more. Before we get into that, I do want to remind any new listeners to make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. If you are already subscribed, then I humbly ask that you share this show with at least one other person, because that, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. With that, let's get into the discussion with Joel Taylor. Joel, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate the time to come talk with you.
Absolutely. I'm so excited you managed to find time. We've known each other for quite a while. You sent me a very nice gift after I spoke at a ATD chapter meeting that you had hosted, and then we got to finally connect in person at ATD International recently. So I'm really excited that we're able to continue the discussion.
Absolutely. That was awesome to connect at ATD. Really enjoyed that event. How'd you like it?
Oh yeah, I thought it was awesome. It's always the best thing I find about conferences, especially this is probably true in any field, but I think it's especially true for something like learning and development, is where very often we are kind of on our own little islands in companies. There's maybe one of us or three of us, or there's just not that many of us unless you're like a Fortune 100 company. And so, meanwhile, nobody else around you has any idea what you do. And so, conferences like ATD it's kind of like our Comic-Con, right? Where it's like you get a bunch of nerds together to like talk about the nerdy stuff that you all love and nobody else understands. I don't know if you find it that way at all.
Oh, it's so accurate, right? All of a sudden, we have these people that understand us.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so great because that's kind of what this podcast is about too. We're talking about something that not, it can be kind of a nerdy topic. It definitely applies to everybody, but especially for these last few episodes, we really focus, hence the name, on leadership development. And when you and I got reconnected at ATD, I really wanted to make sure to have you on because you were in the process of kind of building up a program of helping people transition into the manager role, and I think that's really critical. That at Better Video Studios, that's the thing that we focus on because there's lots of focus on high level leaders, mid level managers, but honestly, in my opinion, the biggest point of friction in companies that I have seen, most common, is you take that technical person, that person who's technically excellent, they're a top individual contributor, that's why they're getting promoted, and you make them a manager. and they were great at the old thing, but they don't have any of the people skills. They've never, which is fine. It's not their fault. They've never done it before. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen when people are transitioning into their first people manager role?
Well, like you said, these are those individual contributors that were high performers, right? And
Yeah.
they have all the intentions of going into these roles and changing how it's run, right? Like they're like, I am going to take this team to the next level. They come in with the
Yeah.
best of intentions.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the 30 standing email invites for the week come in, and
Hit their inbox.
yeah, and all of a sudden this overwhelm happens because now they have these new cross team relationships that they need to
Hmm.
build, and actually their team members are the ones who end up, it's not that they're forgotten, it's just they're like, oh my goodness, I don't know where to find the time, and that overwhelm just happens, right? And
Mm.
then, and some of these leaders, all of a sudden that's when they just kind of get in this freeze.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And I think it's unfortunate because if we had prepared them a little bit more before, we put leaders into these new roles, maybe they'd have that time management skills, or, knowing how to set meetings to coach individuals. It's,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say that the other big issue I've seen, that new leaders come in and they feel like they have to have all the answers. They feel like they're
Mm.
not going to look like they know what they're doing if they don't have all the answers.
Mm.
And that's really unfortunate as well, because that's not how we define a leader. They're not the wise and all knowing, right? That's why we have all these extremely talented team members working for us.
Yeah, there's I want to dig into both of those things because I think they're both so important. First, going back to that time management piece, it's so interesting that you said that because I was at a networking dinner a few weeks ago, and the question, it was kind of a, an icebreaker exercise where they asked everybody, what's the leadership quality that you admire most? And I thought back to, there's one leader in particular that pops into my mind from early in my career who I always admire, and the one trait I love the most is that he always had time. And so, from like a leadership trait that I really admire is when the leader has time. I don't know how he did it. I know the workload that he had, but he had some kind of ability to always make it seem like, his door was always open. He always had time to chat with you. And when you were with him, it didn't feel like you were keeping him from anything else. On that time management piece, let's get, a couple times here, I think we can kind of try to dip kind of tactically, because I think you're totally right. New manager shows up and it's like boom, their inbox explodes and it's just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do you think, what have you seen be successful with folks of how to help people reframe their thinking so that they either don't get overwhelmed or are able to manage those meetings in a slightly better way?
I feel like there's definitely a mentoring piece in this, right?
Mm,
I feel like we also have all these talented individuals who have been doing this for years, and they probably remember that moment. They probably remember
hmm.
exactly that moment where they went, oh no, this just
Yeah.
happened to me. And, they need that person who can relate to it and also say, it's going to be okay. And also, we need to empower our new leaders to say no, or
Mm,
know how to opt out of, say, hey, I can't make this meeting. I will make next week's. Will that be okay with you?
hmm.
And just kind of set some boundaries. Have people set these boundaries early on,
Yeah.
and so they have that time to develop, because it is, as the old analogy of drinking from a fire hose, it can be
Yeah.
that way for a new leader. And so
Yeah.
maybe making it a little bit more incremental, a little bit more mindful on how we walk into this might be a little bit of a better path.
Yeah. Yeah, and even if I love that idea of saying no, and even if it's not no, redirecting to a different time. One of the frameworks that really helped me is just kind of naming this as the idea of like the maker schedule versus the manager schedule, and this idea that the maker schedule relies on, big 2 or 3 hour blocks to be productive, whereas the manager schedule is just a series of 15 to 30 minute blocks throughout the entire day. And I remember early on in my career, because to your exact point, I would say yes to everything, but I would say yes to it blindly. And so I'd look at my calendar and maybe I only have 4 meetings, but they're all spaced like 30 to 60 minutes apart from one another. So 4 30-minute meetings end up like destroying the whole day. And so I love your idea of like empowering managers to kind of, whether it's say no or just suggest like, how about this time, so you can kind of like try to like drive your meetings into one part of the day. But ultimately it just comes down to knowing that you need to take control of this and that you can take control of this.
Absolutely. We need to support them in that because some of the people who are creating these big meetings for them are, highly elevated individuals in the
Mm,
organization.
hmm.
So it can be a little intimidating. And that,
Hmm.
oh, you don't want to suggest, well, can we do that tomorrow? That's difficult. And
Yeah.
I'm very aware of that, you're aware of that, and we need to ensure that these people that we're bringing up the ranks, that we can support them in that as well.
Yeah. And then I also really liked that second piece that you mentioned of having all the answers. I think this is huge. This resonates with me, I think, because we do this in the military a lot, where, there's always this idea of the mythical leader where I think I blame, I blame the media in that we have this idea in movies and stuff where think back to, I don't know if anybody's seen The Hunt for Red October or read the book The Hunt for Red October.
Oh, absolutely.
uh, yeah, right. Like Marco Ramius, when he was the Russian commander played by Sean Connery in the movie, when he's described in the book, he's the guy that was like first in his class at the academy, first person to take this boat out. Like leaders are defined as being the first, being the best, being the ones that know everything. And in the real world, that's just not the case. And that's a lot of reprogramming that has to happen with people, I think.
But interestingly, when they were the individual contributor, they did have all the answers. They were that go to person.
Yes.
But the questions change, right? All of a sudden, these
Mm,
questions have more about, hey, I'm having a tough day with this project. What's your recommendation for it? And it's something you're not familiar with all of a sudden. It's
yeah.
it's on a different plane.
Hmm. Ooh, I love that. It's the quest that whole concept of the questions changed. I I love that. How when have you do you have you had conversations? How do you help people realize that?
Well, usually I always take everything to human performance improvement concept
Hmm. Hmm.
because I try to explain it. Your new purpose is to support people, right? It's not to be an autocratic leader or anything of that nature. We absolutely need to support our workers. So I like to introduce concepts of like the 6 boxes model, just because it's a nice, easy, conceptual way of seeing what people might need. It helps you as a new leader ask the right questions to dig deeper, right? It's kind of like the coaching habit, always stay curious a little bit longer,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so we do have to start asking more questions, dig deeper, and I like to give a framework on different avenues to approach it. And that's why I use that model, is because it's a little older and it's not necessarily widely used anymore, but
Yeah.
it's easy enough to recognize those different aspects.
Not to put you on the spot, but I'm not sure. No, I've heard of it. I'm not super familiar with the 6 box model. What could you walk us through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 6 boxes model is just It's basically looking at different aspects of what people could need to do a good job, right?
Mm.
And it's broken into these six different sections per se.
Mm-hmm.
First one,
Mm-hmm.
expectations and feedback, right? And anybody that's familiar with like situational leadership or some of these other leadership models, we know that differing expectations or perceptions of expectations can cause an issue. Or if we're
Mm-hmm.
not delivering feedback in a timely manner, people aren't receiving it. So there's number one. That's easy. Well, those aren't easy concepts. Let me take that back, but it's easy
Sure,
to
sure.
identify.
Yeah.
The next
It's
box
simple,
could,
not easy.
there we go. The next box is tools and resources. Does
Mm-hmm.
everyone even have what they need to do the job correctly? Because this might not be a performance issue. It might be more of a, oh, I need this software to perform this task. Great.
Yep.
The next one, rewards and consequences. So, what's in it for me? It kind of starts touching on motivators.
Yep.
Next, skills and knowledge. Do
Okay.
we know how to do the job correctly? What do we need to perform better? Next one's capacity. It's truly that selection of people. Is this the right person for this job?
Yep.
And then next is the motives and preferences, that attitude factor. And
Yep.
if we don't have the motives to do it, if it's something I don't like to do, I don't have the motivation, I don't have the right attitude, maybe I'm not the right person for this task. So I like that six boxes model
Yep.
because they're easy to recognize and it helps
Mm-hmm.
people put it in a framework on, okay, well, I need to look here. And like I said, it really drives those questions well.
Yeah, it's really simple. It's really practical. I also love it because as you walked through those, training is really only the direct answer to one of those boxes. And you find that so often, just as people who are in learning and development, training is always the answer. It's like, oh, we need training. It's like, well, how about you walk through these six options, see which one of these is most relevant. I love that. That's great. Um, so
That's
that
actually
so those
where
are some of the common. No, go ahead.
No,
Yeah,
that's actually where I started using it, was in needs
I love
analysis
it.
when I was doing more
Yes.
designing. And I love that you picked up on that. That is spectacular.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when, cuz the audience of the show is kind of a mix of leaders and training folks, and there is that overlap. Like I think all managers, all leaders need to be able to do, or it would be beneficial for them to be able to do some of those early needs analysis questions, of figuring out what people, because ultimately they're trying to figure out what the blockers are, and so those kinds of tools can certainly help them a lot. So I think that's awesome. um, I know you're also so those are some of the common frictions that you see when people are coming in. I think, I mean, to the first point of that model, the first thing is expectations, understanding what the expectations of the role are. And I think a lot of times at a lot of organizations, managers struggle too because there aren't clear expectations of what a manager is supposed to be, let alone what their people are supposed to be. But like, what am I, what are the competencies and skills that I'm expected to have? I think you're doing some work right now of kind of trying to define the role of a leader in an organization. How so if you're when doing that, how do you get started? Because it can be such a big thing. How do you suggest, whether it's an organization or an individual, kind of get started at defining what are the key skills that I need to have as a leader?
So there's a couple different aspects to this.
Yep.
Don't reinvent the wheel, right? There's
Yeah.
100 competency models out there.
I love
Use
it.
them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're going to put in a ton of effort and ultimately it's going to pretty much fit like a puzzle piece in any one of these other competency models.
Yeah.
Now, you can definitely just use them more as reference. And I would highly recommend ensuring that the competency model you build is reflecting the values of the organization, the vision of the organization. So it truly speaks to the culture of the
Yeah.
entire group and not
Yeah.
just Well, I found this on the internet and it looked really cool
Yeah, yeah,
because we all
yeah.
know
It
how that
almost
goes over when we present that to a big group, right?
exactly. And so often too, it's about, to your point about matching the culture. Sometimes that's just in the it's in the language that's used, and it might be saying the exact same thing, but just the words sound differently in different places. And so making sure it's connected to your culture is really important.
Yeah, and revisiting it, anytime values change or a
Hmm.
vision to the organization changes, we need to ensure that we're going back and making sure the competency model still fits to what our beliefs are as an organization, right?
When so we're using a bunch of words here, vision, values, mission, competency. I'll throw in skills as well. In regarding managers, what do you think some of those words mean? Like, what is a competency? Like, whether it's an example, or how do you think of a competency versus something like a skill, or how does a competency relate to the values of a company?
So I always try to explain a competency is actually a group of skills and behaviors that
Okay.
we use,
Okay.
right? So in communication, you can't you can't necessarily go to a leader and say, I would like you to learn communication because it's so
Okay. Yeah.
broad, right?
Yes. Yes.
There's just our body language alone could be its own like full day course, if not
Yes.
longer. And so when we talk about communication, I do like to break it down into more skills based. Like, how do
Yeah.
we communicate through email? How do we communicate during conflict? Right.
Yeah.
And so we have these different skills. And then we also have these behaviors that also work into it. With communication, your demeanor is so important. Are you a likable person? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you tend to be very positive and smile a lot?
Mm.
So how do we really come together to make this competency of communication?
Mm. So then I might tell me if this sounds right to you as I'm hearing you kind of describe this. Kind of what's coming together in my head is almost like y- you could break up. So you have the role as a manager, and you can break that up into, I almost want to say, responsibilities. Like you're responsible for communication or something like that. Like these big picture things that you're responsible for, and then you combine that with the values of the company, and what comes out the other side is the individual skills that someone so this the individual skills are what you need to learn in order to fulfill that competency for your particular culture.
Yeah. And I actually like to interweave the values into the descriptions on how the skills are used. Because,
Hmm.
our values are how we make decisions, how we carry
Yeah.
ourselves within our organization, right? So I
Yeah.
feel like these skills, when we say, you know, communication during conflict, your values should be reflected in there. Say it's
Yeah.
stability or something of that nature. We need to have that interwoven in there so people can see our values in it. It almost has the why built into it. So, why do I need this skill? Because it reflects this in our organization, in our culture, in who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I know when I've heard other people talk about that too, it's almost like you want to get to phrases or descriptions that one, I always think you can use to make decisions, right? Like if you can't use this to make a decision, then it's not really useful. And then two, I think a good check with this two stuff, that I've also heard from somewhere else, I can't remember where I first heard this, is would someone disagree with this? Like if you create phrases and descriptions that are so fluffy or broad that everyone would say, yeah, that sounds right, well then you haven't defined anything yet. Because a culture can't be something for everyone, right? And so I don't know, I almost found that as an interesting exercise. Is like, can you imagine people disagreeing with this? And if so, then that's actually maybe a good thing.
Ooh, I actually really like that. I would be interested in hearing more on that because that is true. Not all organizations' values are the same.
Yeah,
And so it should be a little bit different. While the skill is going to be universal, right?
yeah,
Still, how it ties to the culture of the organization might be different, and that's
yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. One thing that comes to my mind as we're talking about this though is, as you said, there's these buckets of skills that form these competencies that get things done. They can be kind of like infinitely granular. Do you have any techniques for making sure this whole thing doesn't get out of control? Right? Like, how do I literally have seen skill matrices where I think at one company, now this was technical, this wasn't managers, but on the technical side, they were tracking like 5,500 discrete skills. And that just becomes impractical and useless in my mind. So even for this one role of people manager, I don't know. How do you draw the cutoff of, okay, we have gone granular enough or we have done enough?
Usually, when you present it to somebody and their eyes glaze over because they're overwhelmed, that's too much, right? Just pull back, give up, start over. Um,
I love that.
so I do like to break out competency models into leadership level, right? And
Great.
it's not that leaders need different skills per se. It's just
Hmm.
senior leaders need more of a strategic, high level focus, whereas the frontline leader needs something a little bit more interpersonal. And also, they're newer to the role, they need new skills.
Yeah.
So I really do like to talk to the people in the organization and be like, what do you wish you would have known? What would have made your life 100 times easier in that
Mm,
first 6 months? And
mm,
usually you get a lot of similar responses. I
hmm.
mean, there's some of them that, some of the skills that, might be pretty universal and some that might not resonate across different
Hmm.
teams at this point in time. But
Hmm.
yeah, I do like to break it down that way. And
I
if
like
it
that.
does get too big, I don't know. Definitely reaching out and collaborating with other groups within the organization and being like, what can I cut out?
Yeah. It feels like something that could definitely uh benefit from like an 80-20 kind of rule at some point. Is you just, and I always think there's always, it's you always overproduce and then cut back. So it's like you just add lines, add lines, add lines, more skills, more skills, more skills. And then at some point you have to be like, okay, let's hold on here. Some of these can be combined. Some of these are really edge cases. Yeah, I think that's, there's no way to have the right answer from the beginning. Like it's a, like Dan Pink said, right? At ATD, we both saw Dan Pink speak, and he said, you have to act in order to understand. I think this is a great example.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's so granular. You can actually look at your training programs that you're going to be using for it too. If these 13 skills are going to be in this one single day program, well, find a way to make those 13 skills one skill, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. Another one, another similar action to this of how to kind of generate those skills. One thing that I remember hearing from, I think I first heard about this from EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, was you get like executives or top leaders in a room and just ask them the question, who are the best managers in the company? And then there's a perfect like whiteboard, like sticky note exercise. You have everybody write those down, and then you ask why. Why are those the best? Why are they the best people? Why did they come to mind? And that can be another way to try to identify. I mean, one, it's going to be a great exercise to potentially identify some bias if you have those kinds of problems. But outside of that, it's a great way to identify the actions that people are taking, the skills that they have that are clearly the valued manager skills in the organization.
Absolutely. And you can actually do that on the flip side as well. And who are the
Mm-hmm.
worst managers? And identify
Mm.
the traits or behaviors that are also driving against the company culture or what you don't
Mm.
want to breed in the organization, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And probably, ooh, that's a tough one that I really is really sticky. It's interesting. I'm thinking about how, going back to unconscious bias, this idea of unconscious bias or just bias in general, very often in training that I've seen when we talk about terminated employees and a manager comes up and says, I want to terminate somebody. And HR asks why, and they're like, "Oh, they're just not fitting or whatever." And that's a perfect time to be like to really dig in. Just be like, "No, no, no, you can't be broad. Like, what specifically aren't they doing?" I hear that talked about all the time on the individual contributor front. I never hear that talked about on the manager front. And that would be a great discussion to have from a manager point of view. Because so often we do just say, they're not working out. They can't get their team something, whatever, productivity, teamwork, it's not working. But why? Like, that's such a great opportunity to, when there's a manager that we think that either we're struggling with first of all, or if we've just terminated, what specifically wasn't happening that we want to happen in the future.
Yeah, and if we see that one behavior that we're like, we really wish all of these people did this,
Yeah.
bam, put that in the competency model because that's obviously very important to the culture, very important to the people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't take credit for that. Honestly, that comes out of a Blanchard
Really.
training. Yeah, as
Yeah.
comparing the best and worst leaders, and it is it resonates, right? You
Yeah.
get done with that, and you're like, ooh, wow, and you start reflecting on yourself a little and going and writing down some things you'd like to change.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I really like that. That juxtaposition there really kind of draws clarity there. And then I feel like, so you're sitting in kind of, or sit in like a training development role. Do you do you imagine when you have this list of competencies, is that then shared? Like, should all managers see that, and now it's like something that they can utilize themselves? I don't know. What do you see the use of a competency list for
Well,
managers?
ultimately, I think it should be available to everybody in the organization because
Yeah.
I want every employee to know what skills would be, expected of them if they
Yeah.
became a frontline leader, right?
Yeah.
And I think to hold that back from anybody is almost not fair.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes, I think it should be available. I think it should come with an action planning template so they can self identify what they think they need to work on. They can even
Mm-hmm.
work with, their leader to be like, hey, I feel like I'm doing good in these three skills. I feel like I've improved. What do you think would be a good next step? And so
Mm-hmm.
that way it's not just it, because if we're just telling people, if it comes from HR or training and development, it feels arbitrary when we're like, well, this week we're going to work on,
Here's this skill.
persuasion, innovation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
absolutely, it should be widely distributed. It should be talked about, right? It
Yeah.
should be talked about more than once a year, not just at performance review time or anything like
Yeah.
that. It should be talked about often, so people have that opportunity to, you know, develop.
Yeah. I mean, framed correctly, it can be the baseline of any and every coaching conversation, to just, you don't even need to provide anything else. It's just like, here's the definitions, here's what it is, go. Um, yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I will just say, I have seen organizations that worry about releasing specifically manager competencies to the whole company because they don't want to like have something that could be used against their managers by employees when employees see that their manager like isn't living up to expectations or something like that. I think that's crazy, but I've heard it discussed.
No, absolutely. I have heard the same things, and it's fair. Like, but it goes back to that. hey, we're not the expert in everything. Just because there's a competency model, I mean, talking about the
Yeah.
organization you knew that had like 5,000 skills,
Yeah.
if their senior leaders have all 5,000 skills, I mean, wow, that's
Yeah.
so impressive.
Yeah.
When do they have
Yeah.
time to work?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean you have to have these. And if the
Yes.
organization has some skills that are absolutely required, okay, maybe that list should be not out in the open. I couldn't see an opportunity where that would come up. But at the same time, I do think a competency model, these are maybe desirable skills. Maybe it is a
Yeah.
development plan. This
Yeah.
is for you to become your best version of you. And
Yeah.
we really shouldn't be judging other people, and that should be maybe part of a coaching conversation of itself. Of we shouldn't be judging all of our other leaders. We should be working on ourselves and just, helping our teams be awesome.
Yeah. I think that's such a great way to kind of close this out of it really is just being honest with ourselves and so much about getting better and improvement is just like forget about what other people are doing, know what the expectations are, have an honest understanding of where you're at, and then make a deliberate effort to try to improve them. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. And when you're making that shift from individual contributor to the manager role, just realizing that you're kind of starting over again. It's a whole new skill set. It's a whole new thing that you're judged on, a whole new bucket of things that you need to be able to do. And it's just gonna take time. And that's just what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Joel, thank you. This has been great. This has been awesome. I think this has been a really interesting discussion. I really love the beginning about some of those, things that people need to work on. I think there's some great stuff in there of tactics that individual managers can use, or anybody who's making that transition and seeing some struggles. And then at the end, we kind of talked a little bit bigger picture about kind of some of these strategies around planning and creating these competency models of what a leader should be. So this has been great. Uh, Thank you so much for joining us today. I can't believe a half hour has passed already. That was crazy.
Yeah, I really appreciate getting to talk to you again. We're going to have to connect again soon. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. This was great. Thank you so much, Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.